Thank you. It is with pleasure that I accepted this invitation due to the theme of the ERF meeting, social justice. I think this was long due that such a key issues for our countries would be addressed. In my presentation or in my talk, I will address really three main issues. The first one is about social justice. Is it a part of political economy or not? I think it's an important question. We have to take position on this issue if we want to progress in the future. The second part of the talk would be devoted to examining a vast amount of literature which is usually totally ignored by economists, especially the new generation of economists, is what lessons can we draw from late industrializers, which were Japan and then Russia and Prussia, etc. There is a lot of wealth to be researched. And thirdly, what happened with the Arab world? Why is the Arab world today totally out of what we would call, what is called emerging markets, if we compare ourselves with Brazil or with Malaysia or Korea? We've dropped out of becoming really industrialized, as if there was a kind of destiny preventing us to realize full employment and to be part of science and technology and innovation in the world. So I will look in the third part, do we have the good diagnostic about the situation in the Arab world, about what are the reasons of the failure, or do we miss a good diagnostic? So the first few thoughts I want to give about the relation between political economy and social justice is that can we have economic performance, competitivity, innovation without the full mobilization of human resources in a country? If you don't have full mobilization of your human resources, you just can't have social justice. You will have an economy that will be producing social injustice, concentration of wealth, and you will remain technologically stagnant. I think this theme is extremely important, and it tends to be neglected today. I mean, econometrics has taken such a large place in economic analysis that social justice is rather out of the horizon of many people. I remember when I was studying in Paris at the Sorbonne, the main course that was given on political economy in 2 years, the first year we would study the factors of production, how GDP is being formed, what is the factor of production. But then the second year, we would devote the full second year to analyzing the mechanism of distribution of national income, of the different parts of national income. Today, the second part, I think, in political economy teachings has been dropped. We continue to study the factors of production, but how is national income distributed most of the time is out of the horizon of researchers. And what is the link between the way national income is distributed and employment, competitivity, and innovation is also most of the time ignored. So this is why let us, for a few minutes, concentrate on the experience of late industrializer. I will take two 19th century examples before coming to 20th century example. Prussia under Bismarck and Japan under the famous Emperor Meiji in the last part of the 19th century. Between brackets, and maybe I will come back, Japan modernization or industrialization experience began half a century after the first Egyptian experience in modernizing, done under Muhammad Ali. What do we see in common in the two economic policies that were implemented in Japan and in Prussia? First of all, the care for the rural areas, as Dr. Gouda mentioned very efficiently about Egypt. In Japan, the main objective of the revolutionary government of the Meiji was to suppress completely illiteracy in the rural areas, was to prepare the rural workforce to transit progressively to urban towns and to be able to be efficient workers in modern industrial plants. As for the modern sector in Japan, I mean, the big conglomerates, economic conglomerates that were put up by the government at the time by having the old feudal lords to become enterprise leaders and to stop to quarrel with arms or for land acquisition, but to see who would be the best in promoting Japanese exports. These conglomerates would supply total social protection for their workers from the day one when the worker entered a company to his death approximately. And Japanese enterprise until 30, 40 years ago were really those who were giving total social protection to their employees and to the family of their employees. In Prussia, Bismarck was the man who created state social insurance in Europe. He was the leader. He opened the way to the creation of state institution protecting workers and farmers as well. I will also remind that in countries like France or England or Holland, government or the church or a mixture of the two were caring for the rural areas, assisting in putting up cooperatives to grant credits to peasants or cooperative to market their products. And today a giant like Crédit Agricole in France has its origin in the 19th century agricultural cooperatives. In Holland, we had the Rabobank, which is a huge bank, which was also cooperative agricultural bank. So we can see from these very short lessons that I have shortened that if you don't take care of the largest part of the population which has no access to modernity, scientific, technological, educational, you are doomed to fail. I mean, no way to be able to to overcome the gap between you and more advanced countries. After World War II, there was a new paradigm where social justice was extremely important. Either if you take Marxian type of economy, social justice at the basis even of Marxist thinking. In the West, liberal West, the welfare state emerged as the main trend in political economy thinking, and social justice was addressed massively to the point where you had the negative reaction of Thatcherism and then Reaganism, and whereby the welfare state would begin to retreat. But we had also the very large trends of developmental economics. That was addressing the issue of countries that having been under colonial domination or exploitation, and that really needed then to, to make a very big progress and to break the vicious circle of poverty. Most of the developmental literature in the 1950s, the 1960s, large part of it is by famous American economists, is about how to break the vicious circle of poverty with different approaches. You need to import capital, you need to give technical assistance, but all of the developmental theories were about the key role of the state in breaking the vicious circle of poverty. And if you remember, but this is now so old memories, you had the attempts of the Third World Movement to create a new international economic order, a more fair international economic order, and all these efforts had succeeded in creating interesting institution and literature. The creation of UNCTAD in 1964 is the result of this, with also this big project of creating an international fund to stabilize the price of raw materials, including oil. And you had this very important UN document approved by the General Assembly, which is called the Declaration about the Economic Rights and Duties of the State in 1974. This was under the impulsion of President Boumediene, the late President Boumediene at the time, and it was following the big increase in oil prices. And here were the third world countries proposing to the rich countries of the West, let us come and agree on minimum standards. And these minimum standards were agrarian reform to be done, the right to nationalize domestic resources exploited by foreign companies, and the right to acquire technology from the more developed world. I think that Egypt was a leader in 1956 with the nationalization of the Suez Canal, which was also a big moment in creating this approach to a new international economic order whereby social justice would really be at the core of most of the positions taken in terms of economy. Now, what happened in the Arab world after this? Because if you take 1956, for instance, you could believe that the Arab world was going to make wonders. I think we have to ask ourselves today, do we have the right diagnostic? Even the right diagnostic about what happened since 2011. What are the revolt movements that we have seen? Is it bourgeois type, higher middle class, as was said yesterday, for instance? Or is it really a very large movement coming from the deepest part of the society where you had all social strata of the population that intermixed for such a long time, and to have this beautiful demand of bread and dignity? And I would like here to remember that the late Dr. Youssef Sayer, famous Palestinian economist, wrote in the early 50s a beautiful small book called Bread and Dignity, Al-Khubz wal-Karama. And I think we should republish it. So, in fact, if you look at the history of the Arab world, since its opening on the West, on Europe, on modernity, we had at least 4 industrialization experiences that failed. We had Muhammad Ali, 2 were in Egypt, Muhammad Ali and Jamal Abdel Nasser, and then 1 was in Iraq, and the 4th one was in Algeria under President Boumediene. I will not go into analyzing the reason for the failures. It's a complicated combination of external factors and intervention and internal factors, and there is no time to go into it, although I believe that in order to have a better view of what we can do in the future, it would be worthwhile to analyze more why this experience has failed. But we can draw lessons, and we can draw at least 4 lessons for the failures. One was that, the first one is that the pace of job creation, and especially qualified jobs, was insufficient to cope with the pace of population rate of growth. And this indicates also a failure in industrialization. I mean, modernization of the economies were not creating enough jobs, especially for qualified people. And it's amazing to see today, when you look at unemployment figures, that unemployment for university graduates is so high, it's between 30 and 40% in different Arab countries. And this results, of course, with migration of talents and skills and a lot of loss, even financial loss for these countries. There is a lot of literature with which I disagree, saying that the brain drain is a good thing for the exporting countries. I will come back in a few minutes to this point. I think losing its brain when you have been investing in creating an educated manpower in your country, losing it to another country cannot be a positive operation in terms of development. Second, the second lesson, and I am amazed that no international organization is really dealing with this issue strongly. The large pockets of illiteracy that we still have in the Arab world, and in countries of so old civilization as Egypt or Morocco, for instance. 80 million illiterate people, most of them rural, and most of them women. I remember addressing gatherings, IMF, World Bank, etc., saying, or EU, you should have one conditionality for countries which have such large pockets of illiteracy. These pockets of illiteracy has to be taken out in 10 years' time, 15 years' time. This is the only conditionality to disperse aid. But for God's sake, let us concentrate on 30%, almost 20% of Arab population is illiterate. I think this is unacceptable, and if we continue to discuss about what to do in terms of social justice and we don't address this issue, we'll miss the main point. Antoine Zahlan's studies, many of them, very rich studies, have shown all the shortcomings of technology policies in the Arab world. No national innovation policy, no good networking of science and technology institutions. We can see at the very low level of spending on research and development, which is almost concentrated in the public sector, not in the private sector. And there is an absence of policies to master specific industrial clusters. If I take cotton, Egypt has developed cotton since early 19th century. When we need a piece of machinery for textile, we bring it from Japan or we bring it from Germany. So there is something wrong about our way of thinking in terms of being able to master industrial clusters. Now, fourth, a negative trait, we have a massive concentration of investment in what I would call rent sector. The real estate sector is dragging a huge amount of capital to build malls and to build luxurious buildings, and even we have our urban landscape which is being totally distorted, destroyed, uglied, and this is the first item of investment in the Arab world, is the real estate sector. Or we would have the oil sector and the petrochemical sector, which is also geared to exporting raw material at different level of industrialization to the outside world. Something that has struck me recently. I've been living in France. There is no gas in France. There is no oil. But every French house, the poorest one and the richest one, is equipped with gas. Receive gas, and you can cook on the gas, you can have heating on the gas. We in the Arab world, with all this wealth in oil and gas, is there a home that has a gas supply? No. So I think somewhere we have to change our way of thinking. We ran dependent economy on foreign aid, on migrant remittances, on raw material exports, and this rent economy has naturally given way to a very high concentration of wealth. And I mean, even when you analyze corruption in the Arab world, it's always the same everywhere. What you were saying about Egypt, you can find it in a very good report in Tunisia about how the president and his closest friends have been pumping the rent economy. And it's a model. It has become a model. It's the patrimonial state. Maybe we have imported this patrimonial state from somewhere else, but Egypt in the middle of the 20th century, of Egypt Talat Harb, where you had this very big drive for industrialization, is not there anymore. It's something else. So, do we have the right diagnostic about the causes of poverty? I don't believe personally that it is the only cause is the unequal access to good education and to social protection. The cause of poverty is a bad growth development model as opposed to the virtuous positive development model. Yes, you can have 6-7% economic growth. It doesn't mean that this growth is qualitatively good. This is a growth that can, on the contrary, aggravate your rent economy model. And the bad growth is exactly the growth where you concentrate wealth in a few hands and where this concentration of wealth and this vicious circle, this bad growth economy is producing a kind of laziness in science, technology, innovation, or there are no incentives for this. I mean, people are making so huge, so big amounts of money in the rent sectors. Dr. Gouda was mentioning what's happening in the stock exchange in Egypt. That why should people go to innovation? Why should they enter international competitiveness? And so you have this vicious circle. The more you have a rent economy, the more you have brain drain, the more you have less productivity and less competitivity, and the more you have less mobilization of human resources. I believe that what happened with the first two waves of Arab revolution is about this, is about breaking this vicious circle that is provoking scientific and technological stagnation, and that what was asked by all these millions of Arabs in the street was, please change your development model. We cannot continue like this. And I hope that ERF will invest its fantastic intellectual capacity in trying to open the way to new type of research, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.